What would your tribe do if, one night, someone you loved began shouting at people no one else could see? Not a bad mood, not grief, not anger after a failed hunt. A complete rupture. They stare into the dark as if something is standing there. They argue with empty air. They refuse food because they believe it has been touched by a force only they can sense. They stop sleeping. They wander toward the trees while everyone else is trying to stay close to the fire. And the worst part is not that they are sick. The worst part is that no one has a word for what is happening. There is no diagnosis, no hospital, no medication, no therapist, no legal system to decide when a person is a danger to themselves. No quiet room where a family can sit with a doctor and ask what comes next. There is only the group, a few dozen people, tired, hungry, frightened, and dependent on one another for every mouthful of food and every night of safety. Then, one of them stops making sense, and everyone has to decide whether this person is still one of them. We often talk about mental illness as if it belongs to the modern world. Stress, isolation, cities, screens, debt, crowded lives, broken routines. Those things may shape the way people suffer now, but they did not create suffering in the mind. Human beings were afraid of their own minds long before writing, long before medicine, long before anyone had a theory of the brain. The evidence is fragmentary because prehistory leaves almost no direct record of emotion. A broken bone can survive for thousands of years. A panic attack cannot. A hallucination does not fossilize. A family's fear leaves no clear mark in the soil. Still, there are clues. Some ancient skulls have been found with carefully made openings in them, a procedure known as trepanation. In certain cases, the bone shows signs of healing, which means the person lived afterward. Archaeologists have debated the reasons for this practice. It may have been used for head injuries. It may have had ritual meanings. And in some cases, it may have been connected to attempts to treat conditions that people believed were trapped inside the head. That possibility is hard to forget. Imagine a person so disturbed or in such pain that someone nearby decided the answer was to open the skull. Not out of modern scientific understanding, out of desperation, out of fear, out of the belief that something inside needed to be released. That image gives us a narrow window into a much larger darkness. Early humans did not have psychiatric language, but they had the same terrifying problem we still recognize today. A person can be alive, breathing, standing in front of you, and somehow unreachable. To understand why this was so frightening, you have to understand what a human group meant before comfort existed. A small band was not just a family. It was shelter, food, defense, memory, childcare, and survival knowledge. It was the difference between waking up tomorrow and disappearing into the landscape. Everyone mattered because everyone carried weight. Someone knew where the water could be found after dry days. Someone knew which routes were safe. Someone watched children. Someone remembered a dangerous crossing. Someone could track animals. Someone could shape stone. Someone could warn the others when a sound in the dark was not the wind. A person was not just a person. A person was a function inside a fragile system. So when a member of the band became unpredictable, the problem was not private. It belonged to everyone. If they shouted during a hunt, animals could scatter. If they wandered away at night, someone might have to search for them. If they refused food, the family weakened. If they attacked someone, trust inside the camp could crack. If they spoke constantly to invisible figures, children would become afraid. If they could not keep moving, the whole group had to slow down or leave them behind. That is the brutal arithmetic of a world without surplus. It does not mean every group responded without compassion. It means compassion had a cost. Care was not an abstract virtue. It was food. It was time. It was attention taken away from danger. And in prehistory, attention was one of the most valuable things a human being had. The easiest story would be to say that ancient people simply abandoned anyone who became a burden. But the evidence we have does not support such a clean answer. Archaeology has shown that some people with severe physical disabilities survived for long periods in ancient communities. Survival itself can be evidence of care. A person who cannot feed themselves, move easily, or protect themselves does not live long in a harsh environment unless other people keep choosing to help. That matters. It means early humans were not only calculating machines, they formed attachments, they carried the weak, they protected children who could not yet contribute. They sometimes cared for the injured, the elderly, and people who would have made survival harder. But mental breakdown created a different kind of fear. A broken leg is visible. Fever is frightening, but people can often understand that the body is failing. Death, however painful, has a terrible clarity. A mind breaking is different. The person is still there, but the familiar self seems to move out of reach. Their face remains the same. Their voice is the same. Their hands are the same hands that once gathered food, touched a child's hair, carried water, held a tool. Then those same hands may strike out at nothing. That same voice may accuse the family of impossible things. That same person may look at someone who loves them and see an enemy. For the people around them, this was not only illness, it was a collapse of recognition. And human beings are deeply dependent on recognition. We survive by knowing who is safe, who is dangerous, who belongs, who can be trusted in the dark. When that knowledge fails, fear enters the group. Without knowledge of brain chemistry, trauma, psychosis, epilepsy, infection, or severe mood disorders, early communities had to explain what they were seeing with the tools available to them. In many cultures across history, unusual behavior was interpreted through spiritual language. A force had entered, a curse had been placed, an ancestor was angry, a hostile spirit was near, an enemy had sent harm through invisible means. These explanations can sound primitive from a modern distance, but inside that world, they made emotional sense. The person had changed so violently that it felt as if something else was speaking through them. They appeared to respond to voices no one else heard. They seemed to see a world hidden from everyone around them. If you had no medical framework, possession would not feel like superstition. It would feel like an explanation. And once the group believed something invisible had entered the person, the problem became larger than illness. It became danger. Not just danger from the person's body, but danger from whatever had taken hold of them. If a spirit could enter one body, could it enter another? If a curse had reached the camp, who else might be touched by it? If the person was speaking to unseen forces, were those forces now listening to everyone? Fear spreads faster than understanding, so the sick person could become both victim and threat. That contradiction shaped everything. Some communities may have isolated the person, not always as punishment, sometimes as protection. A person might be kept at the edge of the camp, close enough to be fed, far enough to calm the fear of everyone else. The separation told the group that something was being contained. It gave frightened people a boundary. Here is the camp. There is the danger. Between them, a line. Other communities turned to healers, ritual specialists, shamans, elders, or people believed to have contact with the invisible world. These figures were not psychiatrists in the clinical sense. They did not have laboratories, diagnoses, or medications as we understand them. But they occupied a similar social position in one important way. When ordinary explanation failed, the group brought the broken mind to them. Their methods varied widely. Chanting, smoke, touch, fasting, heat, cold water, darkness, plant preparations, rhythmic sound, prayer, confession, public ritual, private isolation. Some practices were probably harmful. Some may have had no effect beyond frightening the patient even more. But some may have helped in limited ways, even if nobody understood why. A calming ritual can reduce panic. A trusted healer can give shape to chaos. A period away from overstimulation can sometimes quiet a person who is overwhelmed. Certain plants can alter mood, perception, or pain. Repeated rhythm can change breathing. Touch, when safe, can remind a terrified person that another human being is still there. None of this means ancient people understood mental illness. They did not. But they were not doing nothing. They were trying to bring someone back using the only map of reality they possessed. The family suffered in a quieter way. That part is easy to miss. When someone breaks mentally, the pain does not stay inside one skull. It moves through everyone who depends on that person, loves that person, fears that person, or remembers who they used to be. A mother might watch her adult son speak to an empty corner of the shelter. A mate might sleep lightly, unsure whether the person beside them will wake calm or violent. Children might learn to stay silent when the strange voice begins. A sibling might feel shame for being afraid, and there would be no explanation gentle enough to make the situation bearable. No one could say, "This is a treatable disorder." No one could say, "The episode may pass." No one could explain symptoms, relapse, trauma, delusion, or medication. There was no promise that the familiar person would return, so the family lived in a kind of suspended grief. They had not lost the person completely. They could not mourn them as dead, but they could not reach them as they had before. That is one of the most painful forms of loss, when the body remains and the relationship changes into something unrecognizable. Then, after a night of fear, the sun came up. Food still had to be found. Fire still had to be kept. Children still had to be watched. The group still had to move when the season demanded it. Prehistoric life did not pause for sorrow. Care could be extraordinary, but it could also fail. This is where the honest answer becomes uncomfortable. There was no single prehistoric response to mental breakdown. Different groups, environments, seasons, and crises likely produced different choices. When food was available and the group was stable, they may have been able to carry someone through an episode. They may have fed them, restrained them, watched them, prayed over them, or kept them close. When hunger came, everything changed. A person who could not walk might be carried for a time. A person who screamed through the night might put everyone at risk. A person who attacked others could fracture the fragile trust that held the band together. A person who needed constant supervision might pull 2 or 3 others away from food gathering or defense. At some point, compassion and survival could begin to pull in opposite directions. Someone might receive less food. Someone might be pushed farther from the fire. Someone might be left during a move. We cannot know how often this happened. We cannot know what was said before it happened. The archaeological record does not preserve the argument between mercy and fear. It does not preserve the person who begged the others to wait one more day. It does not preserve the silence of the people who knew waiting might kill the group. The darkest part is not that early humans were cruel. The darkest part is that they were human. They could love someone and still fear them. They could pity someone and still move away. They could try everything they knew and still decide they had reached the end of what they could give. That tension has never fully left us. There was another possibility, stranger and more fragile. Not every unusual mental state was treated as a curse. In some societies, people who saw visions, heard voices, entered trance, or seemed to move between ordinary reality and another realm could be treated with respect. Sometimes, the person who experienced what others could not see became a healer, diviner, ritual leader, or visionary. The difference may have depended on control. Could the person return from the altered state? Could they speak in a way the group understood? Did their visions produce guidance, healing, warnings, or stories that helped the community make sense of fear? Did their behavior strengthen the group rather than threaten it? If the answer was yes, the same kind of experience that might destroy one person's place in the camp could elevate another person into sacred status. That is one of the most disturbing truths in this history. The line between madness and meaning was not fixed. It was negotiated by the group. A voice heard in the dark could be a demon, an ancestor, a warning, a gift, or a sign of danger. The interpretation depended not only on the experience itself, but on whether the person could still function inside the social world around them. Someone who came back with a story might be revered. Someone who never came back might be feared. The mind was not judged only by what happened inside it. It was judged by what it cost everyone else. That may be the oldest uncomfortable truth about mental suffering. Human beings have always cared, and human beings have always measured the cost of caring. We want to believe compassion is pure, but in a survival setting, it was always tangled with fear, exhaustion, hunger, and danger. A group could be tender one season and brutal the next. A family could protect a disturbed person for weeks, then break under the weight of it. A healer could be summoned with hope, and later, the same person could be avoided as cursed. The person suffering was never the only one being tested. The entire moral structure of the group was being tested. How much fear can a community absorb before it begins to exclude the frightened person? How much danger can love tolerate? How long can people protect someone who no longer seems to recognize them? These are ancient questions, but they are not dead questions. We still build systems around them: hospitals, laws, shelters, psychiatric wards, emergency interventions, family decisions, locked doors, crisis lines, court orders. We use modern language now. We speak of risk assessment, treatment plans, patient rights, public safety, and clinical judgment. The vocabulary changed. The conflict remained. We still ask when care becomes containment. We still ask when freedom becomes danger. We still ask what a society owes to someone who cannot safely care for themselves. And often, even now, the answer is shaped by what that suffering costs everyone else. The person screaming on the edge of a modern street is not as far from the ancient camp as we like to believe. The fire has become a city. The tribe has become an institution. The healer has become a doctor, a social worker, a police officer, a nurse, a judge, or a tired family member making impossible choices at 3 a.m. But the old fear is still there. The fear that the self can vanish before the body dies. The fear that someone loved can become unreachable. The fear that one mind can disturb the fragile order everyone else depends on. 10,000 years ago, people may have called it possession, a spirit, a curse, a wound in the invisible world. Today, we may call it psychosis, trauma, mania, dementia, delirium, or something else entirely. The names matter. Better names can lead to better care. Better care can save lives. Modern treatment is not just a new ritual. It is a real advance. But the emotional center of the problem is ancient. Someone is still in there, or at least we hope they are. That hope may be one of the oldest forms of love we have. The belief that behind the terror, behind the strange words, behind the eyes that no longer seem to know us, there is still a person who can be reached. And maybe that is why mental breakdown has always frightened human beings so deeply. It does not only threaten life, it threatens recognition. It turns the known into the unknown. It makes the familiar face strange. It forces a group to look at one of its own and ask a question no community has ever fully escaped. How long do we keep reaching for someone who may never come back? The oldest tribes did not have an answer. Neither do we. We have better tools now. But when the mind breaks, some part of us still gathers around the fire, listening to a voice in the dark, hoping it is still human.